this week by it's quite bittersweet. It's been a really wonderful journey with everybody, and I just want to thank everyone who's joined us on the Navigate journey. It's been 2 series now, the first one of 7 sessions and this one of 6 sessions. It's been really, really wonderful, and I feel very privileged to have been able to put something like this together. And the breadth and the caliber of speakers, I feel, has been just wonderful, and it's been a learning curve for me. And thank you to everybody who's joined, and to those who have listened back, and to those who have fed back as well. Please God, we'll be able to do something similar in the future. Tonight, our very last of the 2nd series is slightly different. We've had a lot of females in our audience over the last couple of series. We have had obviously some men, but mostly it has been mums who've logged in, and that's quite stark. Now, whereas many of us, well, I don't know what everyone else did during the 1st and 2nd lockdowns, but we have with us this evening Rebecca Goldman, who's a social policy researcher. Is that correct?
Yeah, social science researcher.
Social science researcher.
No one understands what I do, not even my husband or my parents.
Well, once I started reading the report that you put together, during the first couple of lockdowns, you spent your time putting together a really wonderful report on the role of fathers and how lockdown affected fathers and their roles. And that was commissioned by Nuffield, if I'm correct. So it was a pretty hefty and pretty weighty piece of research that hopefully will affect policy. So we are very privileged to have Rebecca with us this evening, sharing her research and sharing the outcomes of that. And to complement that, and I'll move the rabbi into the frame now, or he will move himself into the frame, we have Rabbi Landau, who will join us from both the position of a clinical psychologist who has done quite a bit of research into developmental psychology and the role of parenting, the role of fathers, particularly in the family unit, but also from a Torah perspective and a spiritual perspective, what that role of father is and hopes to achieve. So if everyone ensures that they are on mute, and Rebecca, would you like to take it away?
I will. So as Shoshana said, I've been a co-author of a report at the Fatherhood Institute, funded by the Nuffield Foundation, on fathers during lockdown. And I'm going to present some of the findings from that, mainly in the form of a video. And then I'll go on from that to say a little bit about flexible working and parental leave for fathers, and also the impact of fathers on children. So I'm just going to read this out from the report because my co-author, Adrian Burgess, wrote this, and I think it's quite nice. She wrote, "It is 150 years since the Industrial Revolution removed fathers and other breadwinners from their households for all or most of the working day. Decades, centuries passed, the suburbs spread, commuting times grew longer, and the daily alienation of working fathers from their children seemed irreversible. By early 2020, among the partners' fathers in a study who were in paid work, 90% mainly worked outside of home." So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my PowerPoint slide. Hopefully that will proceed smoothly. Here we go. And I'm going to play a video to show our findings. Basically, Britain Thinks, who are a research company and strategic kind of consultancy, carried out on our behalf a survey of 2,000 fathers about the impact of lockdown. And we got their huge block of tables and went through them and wrote our report. And this is a video which I think is short and sweet and tells the main findings. So I'm hoping this will work because there's not too much audio, so hopefully it will all work well. Let's go and okay, so I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to go to the video, which I've also got here. Whoops. Nope. Sorry, I'm sharing my Teams. Oh dear. This worked when I was in Zoom earlier. So I apologize about this. I'm just going to get it up nice and quickly. Okay. Right. Let's see if this works now. Oh dear. Ah, brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to go back to my presentation now and share that. Whoops. Okay. Here we go. So that shows the survey findings. What I'm going to do now is read out some of the quotes that some of the fathers gave during the study, because as well as doing the survey, Britain Thinks also did some video diary work with a smaller group of fathers, qualitative research. So any of you know about research will understand that. And it was, and they also went back to these dads after the survey as well. This was all carried out in June 2020, the survey and this qualitative work. So it was just after the first lockdown last year, and many children were still at home. I think reception in year 1 and year 6 had started to go back just about, but a lot of the dads were still at home. A third of all the dads in the survey were working outside the home, mostly full time, and that's broadly reflexive of the national position. So about 70% of dads were at home, either furloughed or working from home, or some of them hadn't been working prior to lockdown. So just to read these out, I'll miss having so much time at home. It will feel strange to have so much time apart when it goes back to normal. After work, I used to be knackered, just wanted to get home and put the TV on. Now I can actually spend time with my son and feel awake. Homeschooling wasn't going too well at all this week. My younger boy doesn't like the whole computer logging on for classes. This is his home and he wants to remain his home. It's quite challenging. I saw the stuff she goes through when I'm at work. That's referring to his partner. I seem to understand her better, and she's reacting to me in a more positive manner. Couple of funny ones to lighten the mood here. My son interrupted a Zoom meeting by singing, which was pretty funny and a welcome break from the stresses of work for us all. And this is my favorite, it jumped out at me from when we saw all these quotes. Trying to balance work and family was difficult. My daughter emptied all her glitter over the floor, 20 tubs during a Teams meeting. Who has 20 tubs of glitter was our response in their home. It's been a horrible week, just been a really busy week doing housework, tidying, cooking. Even though I've only got one 9-year-old, I'm not used to dealing with the child. I don't know where the days go to. And of course, even for the dads who were working as key workers outside the home, some of them would be working shifts. And the children, many of them were at home, they weren't at school, because often at that time, schools were quite strict and you had to have 2 key worker parents for a child to go to key worker schools. So this having more time with children really was something for nearly, for a huge number and percentage of the dads. So after all this was a quote from one of the dads. I want this to continue. It feels like business is picking back up for us, but I'm also thinking I like this flexibility. I've been doing some thinking about that with my wife. So I just thought I'd mention here shared parental leave and the right to request flexible working arrangements, which some of you may know about, but the research is showing that a big proportion of dads certainly don't know about the right to request flexible working arrangements. So and there's been very low take up by dads with both of these. So shared parental leave, which is a statutory right, is a new form of what used to be called maternity leave, but has now become 12 months to be shared between the mum and the dad, apart from, I think, the first 2 weeks, the mother can't work after the birth. So that's, if you like, a sharing, but it's not what is done, for example, in Sweden, where it's a use it or lose it, which is when each parent independently has their own right to a certain amount of leave after the birth of the child. So that in that case, they can take it together or they can take it consecutively. This is shared parental leave. So because of often the gender pay gap between mums and dads, because of traditional gender roles, because of the mum may be breastfeeding and it can be hard to express milk the whole time and so on. It's often and usually the mum who's still taking the longer maternity leave. There's also the right to request flexible working arrangements, which is a right for all adults now. Actually, it started off just for parents originally a few years ago. But again, a lot of dads don't realise they've got the right to request it. The employer doesn't have to grant it, but so it's not as ideal as it could be, but it is something there. And it's interesting to see that large companies are starting to change. So in June 2021, just last month, the John Lewis partnership has become the latest British business and the first major retailer to equalise the parental leave it offers employees, and now it's giving 6 months paid leave to men and women. And we were really pleased actually in its press release to see it referred to our research, not this Lockdown Fathers report, but a research review we put together, a review of lots of research on work and care for mums and dads. So that's nice to see some research impact there. And also, a couple of insurers are really setting the trend here. Aviva Insurance and Zurich Insurance. With Aviva, they're actually giving dads up to a year off, the first 6 months fully paid. And on average, new dads at the firm take 22 weeks of paternity leave, and a third of Aviva new dads in the UK work flexibly when they return to work. That's quite striking, really, when dads are given the opportunity. A lot of them are taking it. Zurich Insurance, similarly, 80% of their new dads are taking 3 months or more paid paternity leave to be with their babies. So obviously these provisions are just for a small segment of the workforce, but it's just showing how things are changing. So this is now turning to the bit about fathers, fatherhood and children's development. So I'm going to start off about fathers during pregnancy and after birth. There's some of this may surprise you. I hadn't been aware of all of this prior to kind of, finding out about this over the last few years. So during pregnancy, and when a man becomes a father, typically, all these are typicals in any research. It's always about typical trends or averages. Testosterone levels drop and estrogen and prolactin, which are the female hormones, rise. So probably you've all heard of estrogen. Prolactin is a hormone that is associated with breastfeeding, but actually both men and women have both what are called male and female hormones. It's just that the levels are obviously very different. And oxytocin, which is the feel-good and the bonding hormone, increases when dads interact with their child. And it's been shown in some studies that this seems to be particularly associated with what's called rough and tumble play. So like messing around and, kids climbing over their dads and so on. Expectant fathers may even report sympathetic pregnancy symptoms, and there's discussion, as there often is in the medical profession, about whether this is psychosomatic or actual real stuff going on, and it may be linked to hormones. They've also found, researchers, that there are brain changes related to the time spent responsible for infant care. So they've previously found in mums that when a woman becomes a mother, there are parts of the brain where the neural networks change. And that's something typically that happens in the brain. It's very plastic. So, for example, they found that taxi drivers, parts of their brain expand to do with direction when they learn the knowledge. This is a process happening in new parents. And they found that when fathers spend more time responsible for infant care, that happens to them too. Now, babies do develop attachments to both parents. Quite a lot of people, even at the Fathers Institute, we find many psychologists actually seem to still be just going on about maternal attachment. And even John Bowlby, who was like the father, very appropriate, of attachment and what that means when, a baby is securely attached to its parent and sees that as a secure base and knows its parent loves them and so on. Even he said that, you can have multiple attachments. It's not like when it's not like ducks, it's not just an imprinting thing. It is a real relationship there. So, and dad's mood affects children directly and via mother's mood and the couple relationship as well. And dads can get antenatal and postnatal depression. That's something that's really just come out in research the last 10 or 20 years and is a very big area now of research. And the NHS has actually recently put in some provision, some clinical psychology provision for dads when their partners get postnatal depression. At the Fathers Institute would like to see that go much further, but it's being acknowledged now that dads have these mental health needs too, especially when they first become a parent. So here is some research from UK studies that follow babies into adulthood. So typically they take a whole cohort of babies. So they might take all the babies born in 3 months in a particular year or something like that. And they basically go back and interview the parents repeatedly over years and often through their whole lives. There's one study where the children were born in the 1940s and they're now obviously well into older age. So these studies, the more recent ones, have shown that dads who see themselves positively as parents adjust well to fatherhood and respond emotionally to their child in the early years are associated with much better emotional and behavioural outcomes for children at these different ages. Dad's play, reading with children, and involvement in learning activities are linked to better educational outcomes. And also for separated dads, increased involvement and contact is related to better child adjustment. Now, financial contributions through work are also important. So all this stuff saying, that it's important that dads are with their kids and develop a good and deep relationship with their kids, play and read and whatever. It's not to downplay the importance of work and financial contributions. Although I was reading earlier about some research that's showing that the balance between those things changes as your income increases. So, there comes a point at which maybe the benefit of an involved dad becomes more important than the benefit of an increased income. But, that's where research is at the moment. Okay, so why does father involvement with children matter? What are the kind of theories about why you see this, that when fathers are more involved, their children's development, their children's happiness, their children's outcomes are better on average? So the research has shown that the quality of their involvement is more important than the quantity, but the quantity of time and maybe the range of time at which they're with their children can help develop a wider range of activities together. So if we're talking about weekdays or weekends, we're talking about bedtimes or early mornings or helping with homework. In a child's life, different types of activities and involvement tend to happen at different times of day and on different days. Two involved parents, including where they're separated, gives the child exposure to two parental personalities and two parenting styles. A parenting style is the way in which you create boundaries and teach your child between right and wrong, and the way that you respond to your child's good and bad behavior and so on. So typically you might find that, you know, one parent is maybe a bit harsher than the other or stricter than the other and so on. Parents have different interests and activities and often different values and behaviors and vocabulary even. So, you know, in terms of behaviors, some of it's about role modeling. You know, you might have one parent that eats really healthily and one that doesn't eat too healthily, and the child's looking at all of this, and you know, they realize with the two parents that first of all, adults can do different things. There's not just one way to do things, and also they hopefully pick up the good parts of each parent. So that's why two involved parents are often better than one. Not to say that one parent, you know, there are lots of children that do amazingly with one parent, obviously. So this is just, you know, what the theories about why dads are important. Fathers tend to do more play, in particular rough and tumble play and risk taking and sport. And I found this fascinating, that dads tend to ask more questions of children and use longer words. My colleague Adrian at the Fathers Institute is a bit skeptical about this and says that, well, maybe it's because the fathers are less often the main caregiver, so they're not so embedded in their child's daily language. So they you know, they use words that maybe their child doesn't quite understand yet or whatever more often than mums do. But anyway, that has been shown in research. So and just finally, to come back to the first point I made, which is that COVID, and it has been an absolutely dreadful time. And in fact, in the lockdown fathers report, only 20% of fathers, as you would expect, maybe that's higher than you would expect, said their mental health had improved. About 40% said it had stayed the same, and about 40% said it had declined, their mental health. But maybe the silver lining in all of this, that for many fathers, they have spent more time with their children, and not just with their children, but with their partners, and doing things together. Not just because of work, but also because so many children's activities have been cancelled. So there might be more family walks on weekends rather than the children being taken off to classes and parties and so on. So there has been often a lot more family time. So this just sums up the statistics about what's been happening. So in 2014 to 15, the Office for National Statistics found that men were spending about 40% of the time that women spent on childcare, but that jumped to 64% in lockdown. So although women were still doing more than men, you've probably seen so many news headlines about this. The gender gap between the time they spent with their children did reduce. And then in May 2020, the Office for National Statistics did a follow-up time use survey to see how people were spending their time. And they found that basically men's childcare has slipped back to 50%. So it had slipped back, but it was still well above 40%. And, you know, we'll see what happens next, whether any of this is sustained. Maybe not, because, you know, we do live in a very gendered society and so on. But I think what this shows is that if dads can capitalize on any extra time they did have with their children during lockdown, that will be so important for children. So always father and child time is just so important. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was great. That was very, very interesting and mind-blowing in some cases, and just a little bit of a sadness also just at the very end, where to see that everything kind of slips back again, but a bit of a hope as well that it hasn't slipped back to quite the care gap that it started at. At this point, though, I will pass the laptop across to Rabbi Landau. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
It's so nice to see you. It's been such a long time since we were last together. Locked up for a very long time.
Not locked up.
Not locked up. Not locked up. Thank you, Rebecca, for that excellent and really interesting presentation. I think some of my points might touch a little bit on what you touched on, so I hope that our audience will forgive me for a tiny bit of repetition, but I'll try to make that as minimal as possible. So the plan is that I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes and then or 15 minutes, and then we'll go to questions and discussion at the end. I'm going to begin with a caveat, then talk about some of the psychological parts and interweave them and conclude with some of the more Torah parts as well in terms of the role of fathers. I would also, by the way, just anecdotally agree with, or at least have experienced what Rebecca was sharing in terms of lockdown fathers having more time with their kids. So my non-lockdown schedule sees me leave the house before the children are awake, and sometimes not see them until I'm kissing them whilst they're sleeping in their beds. Certainly back in Israel, that was often the case also, that I wouldn't see the children during the week, and lockdown was an entire change for my role as father, particularly with Ezra, who we had less time to build a relationship because he's younger, so we had more opportunity to bond over lockdown. I think it's done innumerable benefits to our relationship. So, you know, God bless lockdown for the silver linings of happier dad-son relationships and dad-daughter relationships.
Next lockdown, we're going to work on the housework relationship.
Next lockdown, we're going to do the housework part. Yeah, there was a statistic there, Rebecca, in your video, which talked about fathers doing more or dads doing more housework, and Shoshana made a point. That didn't happen in our house. Oh no. So anyway, I want to make a bit of a caveat at the beginning, which is I think that both the literature from the psychological studies as well as the Torah texts do create some sort of stereotype around maleness and fatherness versus femaleness and motheringness. And so clearly, so while stereotypes are there to be broken, and we all know it, mothers who often act like fathers and fathers who can often act like mothers in terms of stereotypically gendered behavior. So I'm going to just like caveat and bracket that is the case. The literature is doing what it does. It's lumping together sort of a bell curve of behavior. So you could think, you know, that there might be a bell curve of what we might stereotypically define as male-centric behavior, and a bell curve of what we might stereotypically define as female-centric behavior. And so when we talk about fatherhood and motherhood, we're not necessarily trying to genderize everything here, but we're trying to sort of create two types or two different ways of being that seem to be emerging from the way that people are doing this stuff. So and that would then possibly even go back to a way to interpret, say, a Torah text. That a Torah text might be talking about a role of a male parent, a role of a female parent, but what it's maybe trying to connect to is there are male type ways of being and female type ways of being, and both of them are important. So I just wanted to caveat from the beginning. Okay, so Rebecca already mentioned in her talk that one of the groundbreaking pieces of developmental psychology insight was from Bowlby, who talked about attachment theory. And there's really there's no developmental psychology course that won't spend a good deal of time thinking about attachment. And attachment has been recognized as sort of the silver spoon that we can give our children for their emotional well-being, for their interpersonal well-being, for their academic well-being and success, for their career success. That attachment seems to be almost like this absolute key skill that children need to acquire or be supported to understand in their development. Shoshana's just gone to look after our child, a securely attached child, I hope, to his mum. So Bowlby talked about, and maybe to me, but you never know, but we'll talk about that in a second. So Bowlby said, what was attachment? Attachment is whereby a parent can create a secure base for their child, so that the child always knows that whatever happens, they can return to their secure base being the space of the relationship. So it's not talking about necessarily a physical space, it's talking about the fact that someone's got my back, someone's going to be looking out for me. And when you have that security that someone's got my back, someone's looking out for me, you can go and curiously and confidently explore the world, because you know that should something untoward occur, someone will look after you. And the way that Bowlby's the way that Bowlby's theory was used to be tested was in Ainsworth's strange situation, whereby you take the infant and you put them into a strange situation, you put them into a room with a strange adult, and you'd see what would be the interaction between the child and the adult. And there were a number of different types of attachment that could be determined there. There could be inappropriate attachments, whereby the child tries to seek out comfort from the new adult, which is inappropriate because you don't go and hug any stranger. That shows a poor attachment, a poor attachment an insecure attachment sometimes to the primary caregiver. It could be that the child is freaked out by the adult, by the new adult, but then when mummy or daddy, the primary caregiver, comes in to offer care and succor and warmth to comfort the child refuses to be comforted by the main caregiver. That's an avoidant attachment. So there's something again broken down there. It could be that the child feels is totally out of control in this strange situation, both with the new person and also with the primary caregiver. That's a disorganized attachment. That's a really quite a difficult one. But then there's a secure attachment, whereby the child gets anxious by the new person, by the strange situation, and when mummy or daddy comes in, the primary caregiver comes in, so the child is comforted. And that demonstrates that they were able to explore for a while. They got a bit upset, and then they had the confidence that mummy was going to, or daddy was going to be able to make it better. And the reason I'm saying mummy or daddy is because the Bowlby experiment was not a gendered approach to parenting. It didn't distinguish between which parent was there as the primary caregiver. It simply said that a child needs an adult who is a primary caregiver to offer that secure base. And once the child has that secure base, it could be in the form of a grandparent, it could be in the form of an older brother or sister, an uncle or aunt, a foster carer, an adopted parent. It could be in the form of any primary caregiver that is willing to offer the secure base to the child. So then everything is like, we have that silver spoon already. We are giving our child that advantage in life. And it's only later on in the literature and in research that the nuanced differences between male style parenting and female style parenting, let's just call it mums and dads, that the nuanced differences between what mums and dads contribute comes into play. And it's important also because if you think about the sort of the underlying message of Bowlby, it's as long as you've got one primary caregiver, and there is an idea that there's a primary caregiver, then child is fine. And I remember when I learned that in my undergraduate psychology course, it was quite disempowering as a parent, as a father, because clearly in my life, well, not clearly, but the primary caregiver was going to be Shoshana. So therefore, if my child already has a primary caregiver, like, okay, well, I'm done. You know, like I don't need to offer anything else anymore because the silver spoon has been delivered in the form of my child's mother, but not in the form of my child's, not the form of my child's father. So then what do I need to offer? But then as we've been exploring with Rebecca, the literature now has been looking at a huge amount of benefits to parenting, to fathering as well as mothering, and that there are unique contributions of fathering as well as mothering. One more caveat, which is, of course, you know, some people don't have the luxury of being able to offer both a father and a mother to a child, single mother homes or single parent homes. So we do the best that we can. That's all that parents can ever do. And I think that that's a good piece of advice for all of us, is that we do the best that we can. That's all we can ever do. But I want to think about three domains of the way that fathers can impact the family home. The first is with the child. The second is with their partner, if they are in a sort of traditional two-parented home, and also with themselves, that actually the experience of having healthy parenting, having healthy fathering is good for the father too. So first of all, with the child, there is a huge amount of longitudinal associations that show that that the more time that fathers spend with babies, the better. So one second, I've just got my details here. Fathers who spend a lot of time helping their children with their studies increase their children's learning, they increase their children's thinking skills, that children are going to have better social skills, fitness, sports activities. There's going to be a whole spectrum of improvements in terms of educational competence, getting better grades, performing better in school, being more motivated to education. There are powerful effects on child's cognitive development, that infants as young as 5 months old score higher on measures of cognitive development if they've got highly involved fathers. So there's a huge, and like the list goes on and on and on in terms of the benefits to children of engaged and involved fathers. And back in actually in the 80s, the late 80s, there was a piece of work that looked at 3 basic traits that nurture the father-child relationship. Those are engagement, which is the father's direct contact and shared interactions with their children. There was availability, which is the father's presence or accessibility to the child, and responsibility, the father's arrangement for resources to be available to the child. So all these things were the sort of the holy trinity, forgive the language, for engagement, availability, and responsibility for building a strong father-child relationship. And there were the research went on to enumerate 15 distinct ways in which fathers tend to be involved with their children, through communication, teaching, monitoring, engaging in thought processes, providing for them, showing affection, protecting, supporting them emotionally, running errands, caregiving, engaging in child-related maintenance, sharing interests, being available, planning and sharing activities. So broadly speaking, if you go across the literature, in almost all outcomes, in terms of cognitive outcomes, social outcomes, relationship outcomes, career outcomes, having an engaged parent, engaged father, in addition to the primary caregiver, possibly of a mother, creates a huge amount of positive outcomes. There are some unique things as well, which is not just about enhancing the child. There's unique things such as boys being able to deal with authority better if they have an appropriate authority figure as their father, not seeking out other authority figures, or not coming coming foul of authority, either way, either meaning trying to seek out authority or run away from authority. Either way, that's an unhealthy relationship with authority. But if father, in that sort of more stereotyped way, can create authority in the home in a healthy manner, so then that becomes something which is well internalized by the child. And Shoshana wants me to say that also it's not just about authority in the context of sort of rules, but it's also maybe something a bit more like an alpha male style, that if for girls, if father has high regard of their daughter's beauty, their daughter's grace, their daughter's wonderful attributes, so then there's a lot of literature that shows that girls are less likely to try and seek out that validation from boys elsewhere, but because they have like the man in their life, so who loves them, supports them, and thinks they're wonderful and beautiful and and incredible, so then they don't need a boyfriend or a guy on the street to do that for them. So there's some interesting research around that as well. Funny anecdote that one time Yiska said, she says, when I grow up, I want to marry you, Papa. So that's I don't. So we understand that that's not the. But the point is that she has someone in her life who already thinks that she's an amazing young woman. So so she doesn't necessarily need other people to give her that validation until it's the right time. It also creates a healthy sort of sense of what that relationship could look like for the future. And that's, I think, something which is important about modeling, which is underlying this idea of presenting authority, presenting a male figure, which is you model what healthy maleness is. So you model that for your boys, who can then internalize authority for themselves in a healthy way. And you model a male figure for your girls so they can internalize what a balanced, loving male figure is as well. And all that feeds into that outcome data, which I've just alluded to. From a psychoanalytic perspective, so there is another way to think about what the father can offer the child, is that the father cuts the umbilical cord between mother and child. So there's lots of thinking around the close bond between mother and baby. And Melanie Klein, for example, from the Tavistock, so she talked about the good breast and the bad breast. So the good breast was the breast that is the part of the mother that's always available to the child, always nurturing the child's needs. And the bad breast is the one that is not always available, that is sometimes busy, that mummy's tired, mummy's doing something else, mummy's making supper, whatever it is. I just did a stereotype there, sorry. So anyway, so the point there is that the child needs both, that the child needs a good enough parent, because otherwise the child thinks the mother is just an extension of themselves. And if the mother is just an extension of themselves, so they don't understand that there's a space between them. They need to separate out and realize that mummy is mummy and baby is baby, and now we can have a relationship. Because otherwise, if mummy is just an extension of me, so there's no relationship there. There's just this sort of assimilation of the other. So that's one level of separating out mummy and baby. But actually, the best way to separate out mummy and baby, really to really cut the umbilical cord. I don't know how many fathers cut the umbilical cords of their children. But to really cut the umbilical cord, in terms of the psychic umbilical cord, is to have another relationship that, not to say that it gets in the middle of mummy and baby, but it creates a triad. It creates a triangle now. So rather than just being a dyad, a single line, you now have a triangle. And that means that baby has a different relationship to recognize that my whole world isn't within the confines of mummy, which until this point, it was physically during pregnancy, it was emotionally during breastfeeding or feeding and subsequent time. And now relationships can be expanded out with the next model, and that model becomes the father. So from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's about cutting off the psychic connection between mummy and baby in a healthy way to expand out the repertoire of what relationships could be, and providing the right model for that. Now, in terms of those dispositional differences between, or that authority difference between maybe a mother and a father, Rebecca already talked about the different play styles of fathers, that fathers might be more into rough play and like physical activity when it comes to children, pushing children a little bit more than the ways that mums play. So the Torah itself, in the way that it describes the two different responsibilities of children to parents, is sensitive to those dispositional differences in terms of the relationship between fathers and sons, and fathers and children. So the first source is in the Ten Commandments. In the Ten Commandments, it says, Kabed, honor, es avicha ve'esimecha, honor your father and your mother. When it comes to that, that's one style of interrelationship, is honor. Honor is a love-based relationship whereby the love that I have for my parent wants me to offer them honor, to offer them to meet their needs. That's what honoring parents is understood by the rabbis to mean. It means to give my parents food if they need food, to look after their physical needs if they have physical needs. So there we put the father first rather than the mother. Honor the father, rather than the mother. In Leviticus, in Parshas Kedoshim, it says, Ish aviv v'imo, one second. Ish es aviv v'imo tira'u. I've got this wrong. Yeah, ish es imo v'aviv tira'u. It says a man or a person. Thank you, Shoshana. It's I think 10:3. Anyway, so a person should revere their mother and their father. First, it puts the mother there. Reverence means to hold them on a pedestal, to consider them to be very, very important. This is in Leviticus 19:3. It says, Ish imo va'aviv tira'u. A person should revere their mother and their father. And reverence is to really think that they're incredible people, to hold them up on that pedestal. And so there's two different dynamics of the relationship there. There's the love and there's the reverence. Now, love, we put the father first. Reverence, we put the mother first. Why? Because it's the opposite of the natural way of doing things. One naturally loves their mother more, or wants to, in terms of this is again stereotypes. One naturally loves their mother more because mummy's that warm place. Mummy is that place of nourishment, of holding, of giving all my needs, necessary or whatever, of that holding of a mother. And so we prioritize reverence of mother before reverence of father, because that's the one that's more difficult. dad, who's the more authoritative person within the family. So we prioritize the requirement to offer love to dad, because again, that's the non-easy way of doing things. That's the less natural way of doing things in terms of stereotyped relationships. And so that's why the Torah puts, when it says honor your father and mother, because it's more difficult to honor your father in terms of love. And it says revere your mother and your father, because it's more difficult to revere your mother. So that's quite interesting. I'm going to move on quite quickly because I realize I'm running out of time. So I want to talk about two other Torah pieces, and we'll have to leave the final psychological points where when a father is doing his job as a father, it also improves generally the relationship with his partner. And so the father-mother relationship is often improved when fathers are being healthy fathers. And not only that, but fathers themselves, their well-being increases by being sensitive parents and sensitive fathers. So there are benefits all around. What are a father's obligations from a Jewish perspective? It's interesting to note that actually the majority of the obligations of education and even reproduction fall on the man, they don't fall on the woman. Sort of maybe against some of the stereotypes that we have, but the father's obligation includes, he's got the obligation to reproduce. A woman doesn't have the obligation to reproduce. She is necessary in order to bring about reproduction, but it's actually the mitzvah is on the father. It's the sages in the Talmud in Kiddushin, page 29a, say a father has the following obligations towards his son. We're talking about a son because there might be more obligations for a son than a daughter. You'll see why. So he's got his obligations to circumcise him, to redeem him if he's a firstborn, to do pidyon haben, to teach him Torah, to find him a wife, to teach him a profession or a craft or a trade. And there are some say he's even got to teach his child how to swim. These are all the obligations of a father, are to look after the spiritual needs of the child in terms of bringing him into the covenant of Abraham, teaching him Torah so that he's proficient in what he needs to do as a Jew, giving him the ability to have a home, a happy home in terms of having a wife, giving the ability for sustainability so he's got his own profession or his own means of income generation. And finally, just that he can look after himself, he needs to know how to swim. So my final point for the Torah perspective is a story. It's an ancient story. It's one of my favorite stories. And I think it cuts to the heart of where we see the first real parenting father interaction in the Torah. It's on a mountainside in Israel. And climbing up the mountainside is the patriarch, Abraham, and the patriarch, his son, Isaac. The reason that they're going up the mountain is because Abraham has been commanded to offer up his son Isaac as a sacrifice. And God called out to Abraham. He said, Avraham, Avraham. God said to Abraham, Avraham, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham responded, Hineni. He responded, here I am. Here I am. I'm ready to perform your will. I'm here because I'm your servant. I'm going to perform my will, your will. So imagine, this is the greatest mission that Abraham has, is to fulfill the will of God. In our own lives, there are many things that we feel are our missions. So, whether that's being, say, your profession or your role in society, in an organization, there are things that we hold up to be of extreme importance. And there, Abraham responds to God, Hineni, here I am. I'm ready to fulfill your will. Little does he know that fulfilling God's will means he's going to have to take his son up the mountainside to offer him up as a sacrifice. But he does. They're walking up the mountain. And there's a conversation that is recorded between Abraham and his son. And it goes like this. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham Aviv. Isaac says to Abraham, his father, Vayomer, and he says, Avi. He says, Dad. Now, if you're Abraham and you're walking up the mountain and you're going to perform your mission, and you're going because you're devoted to this mission, and you're going to sacrifice your son, what is the last thing you want to hear as you're walking up the mountain? The last thing you want to hear is your child call out to you and say, Dad. On a smaller level, how many times are we in the middle of something? Like I'm sitting down here, I'm doing some work, Papa, Papa, and there's a sound from upstairs, like, come on, Dad, come and give me a kiss, come and do this, come and do that. Sometimes, but Abraham, the last thing he'd want to hear is Dad, because if he's going to do this, if he's really going to fulfill the mission, he needs to cut off that part of his head, that part of his heart, that part of his soul from this moment, because otherwise, how is he going to bring himself to do it? But Abraham doesn't do that. Abraham says, here I am, my son. Just as he said, "Here I am" to God, he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Here I am" to Isaac. That is, I think, the model of attentive, attuned, thoughtful fathers. That we're able to put things down when we're asked and say, "Here I am. I'm right here for you." Thank you everyone for joining us on Navigate. I think we'll open up now to some questions to Rebecca, and if you want to me as well.
Do you want to stop the live stream just so that questions are not recorded?